Welcome back to another episode of Unlearn the Crap and Level Up, where your soul is calling you. Today, we are going to have an amazing conversation with my guest, Kathryn Traff. Kathryn, as my audience knows, Unlearn the Crap is about the physical excrement that our body has, that waste that we need to get rid of, that comes from suppressed emotions. It comes from the stress hormones that we are not releasing. It is about the fascia and the lymphatic system and our digestive system. But it's more than that. It's also the way our brains and our beliefs are wired with our conditioned responses and automatic programming. And that we need to release all of that disempowerment from us in order for us to live aligned with who we are. Kathryn, what crap did you need to unlearn for you to level up?
That is such a great question. And I'll start with, this was about 3 years ago, a little bit more now. I had the worst day of my entire career in the operating room, working for a surgical technology company, running sophisticated imaging systems, computer equipment. And I was in a job that I loved, but I was burned up and burned out from. And the crap that kept me stuck where I was number one, I had a gray zone drinking habit that took the place of self care because I had zero self care. But more importantly, it turned my mind off or down at the end of the day. So I didn't have to think about that I was in a place in my life at 55 years old where I didn't love my life anymore. And I had every reason to be in love with life from the outside looking in, but I didn't have the courage to ask myself the questions about what do you need now? Where do you go from here? Really important big questions, because the biggest crap I had to unlearn was stop turning your mind down or off with exogenous substances and start looking at what's important to you, and let's get to the root of why you're in this place to begin with. So that's probably the biggest piece of crap I had to unlearn, was getting rid of that gray zone drinking habit.
Wow. Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest right up from the beginning. Kathryn, before we go any further, could you please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us who you are and how you level up and serve?
Oh, okay. I love that too. How do I level up and serve? That's awesome. We'll start with I currently own my own business. I run a ministry that is targeted at professionals who are in their midlife, much like I was, who are completely stuck in some kind of gray zone. As I mentioned, mine was a gray zone drinking habit. Maybe yours is you're a workaholic. Maybe yours is you eat too much, you shop too much. We all find ourselves, particularly in midlife, in our own version of a gray zone, and we don't know how to get out of it. We're just completely stuck, and we don't know where to turn next. Because I've been there, I developed a proprietary methodology to get myself out of that place. And as I was helping coach others move through their own gray zones, I understood that I could build a business and a ministry off of that. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm clear about to your audience is I come from a place, I mentioned that I was working in the operating room. I come from a 20 plus year career in neuroscience. And I had the opportunity to learn from some of the brightest minds in the world at places like Mayo Clinic and Stanford. And when you spend 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day in operating rooms with the brightest minds in the entire world, and you know how to ask good questions, you get a world-class medical education. Ooh. And you really do. I was involved in anything from, if you know anybody who has Parkinson's disease, there's a technology that the company I represented produces, and I helped train surgeons on it and be in the operating room implanting these therapies that works for it. It's like a pacemaker, but for the brain. And so it was my privilege to be involved in surgeries like that with neurologists, neurosurgeons, neuropsychiatrists, and all the way up to tumor removal for patients, all the way up to very complex spine surgeries, you name it. If it involved the brain or the spine, I was involved in it. And I got the most incredible education you could ever want around all things brain related. And I'm a brain nerd. So I take that neuroscience experience, I bring it to my clients, I combined it with mindset and a faith practice of any sort that I meet people where they are. And we use those three things together to help people unlearn the crap and get out of their own gray zones and start living the life that people know they've been created for. They just can't quite figure out, what have I been created for? But they know they're not doing what they need to do now.
Yeah. Oh, I love that in so many different ways. And there's so many things that I want to talk about in those different subjects. I want to start with your purpose of helping people through gray zones, because part of what I talk about all the time is the stress and burnout that comes from our central nervous system always being on, about us being out of alignment with our own true purpose. And what that happens is we start to get sick, we overgive, we end up depleting our resources. And so I think what happens for a lot of people, and what happened to me, is I just kept soldiering on with the shoulds. I was supposed to show up every day. I was supposed to continue to work. I was supposed to continue to deliver at an exceptionally high level.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've learned is that women, by the time they're late 40s, early 50s, we've carried too much for too long.
Yes.
And now our body can't process anymore. And we start looking for coping mechanisms. Where do you see the gray zone coming, and how does that become a coping mechanism that actually serves, even if it's not serving well?
No, that's a fantastic question. And I loved your summary about how, because you completely nailed it, our nervous system has two parts, right? We have the sympathetic nervous system, which when I am talking to my clients, we talk about, sometimes they don't want to use any kind of science terms. So I ask them to think of it as that's your primal part of your nervous system, right? So if a bear is chasing you in the woods, that part of your nervous system kicks in and it helps you escape, right? And that's the appropriate use of that part of your nervous system. And what happens is when you and I get to that point that you mentioned, we get up to our 40s and we've spent a lot of time in that part of our nervous system, we forget. Our brain really doesn't understand that you getting in trouble with your boss at work and possibly losing your job is not a physical danger, but your brain perceives it as physical danger. And so you respond the same way. But what happens is, instead of moving in and out of that quickly, danger's over. Okay, I'm fine. You stay there, right?
Yeah.
And so my purpose in helping people recognize gray zones and understanding how they got there to begin with is that helping you understand how to spend way more time in your parasympathetic nervous system, which I would call your powerful side of your nervous system, right? That's the place where energy is created, solutions are created, ideas, joy, that's where all that stuff lives. And when you spend more time in that part of your nervous system, that's when you can start moving in a better direction. Now, I want to make sure, because anytime you get me talking about the brain, I get a little sidetracked. So I want to make sure, full disclosure, nerd alert, nerd alert.
Nerd here too.
Okay, good. One nerd to the other. Watch out. So to answer your question, can we go back? Will you ask me again? I want to make sure that I answer this about gray zones for people. Just ask me your question again, would you please?
Absolutely. Everything serves a purpose, but it's either empowering or disempowering.
Right.
So even a gray zone drinking or a gray zone shopping or a gray zone anything,
Yeah.
while it is not necessarily empowering us, it's still serving a purpose. It's still meeting a need.
Mhm.
And that's why we
Mhm.
continue to do it.
Yes.
Could
No,
you address that?
of course, you've completely nailed it. I'm not sure how much more. We might have to end the interview right now, Kathy. No, you've nailed it on the point that we do it because it gets us through the moment, right? And the example I can give you is when I got home from the operating room after a 12-hour day of this was the most demanding of work, right? I worked on the surgeon's schedule. I didn't work on my own. And because it was easier to open the bottle of wine and pour myself a glass of wine while I made dinner, instead of let me get changed into my yoga clothes, let me put my yoga mat on the floor, let me turn on YouTube and find that yoga video that I like to do. And now I've got to spend 30 minutes doing the yoga to feel better. I chose the easy route every time. And we choose the easy route because it gives us instant relief for minimal
Yeah.
effort, right?
Yeah.
And what we don't evaluate, and certainly what I did not evaluate, was that, 30 to 45 minutes of relief before the effects of the alcohol really started taking a negative turn, and then the way your body responds to the alcohol also produces all kinds of negative effects that typically last about 18 hours. I was not evaluating if that 30 minutes was worth the resulting 18 hours of discomfort, right? So
Mm.
that's why we get stuck in these gray zones, because the immediate benefit or perceived immediate benefit is so much easier and so much more quick to give us what we're looking for. And the problem comes when we start doing that instead of doing the harder things that give us more benefit in the longer term.
Yeah. And then that creates its own stress
Yes.
on our body, because now we have these effects that our body has to overcome. And now we start to normalize a lower quality of life, and the bar gets
Mhm.
dropped lower and lower.
Yeah, that is absolutely perfectly said. I would like you to come on one of my coaching calls and you can be my co-coach.
I like to be able to explain to people what is physiologically
Right.
happening within their body, because I
Right.
believe that the true power comes in self-knowledge. And
Yes.
that for me, I didn't know any of this because I was so locked. I'd spent 40 years as a nerd. Okay. I studied, neurology, biology, quantum physics. I mean, human behavior, psychology. I've done all of that. And I did it part because I'm a Gemini and I'm very curious and I need to know everything. And partly because there were situations in my circles of strokes and addiction, and me trying to make sense
Mhm.
of the traumas that I experienced and trying to understand why and how it was happening so I could create my own safety.
Yeah.
So that's part of how that came. But it's really important to me that people understand that if it goes unchecked, if we
Mhm.
live within this gray zone, we're not going to coast.
Mhm.
Eventually, we're going to break.
Yes.
And my goal with this show and my goal with everything that I do is to give the education to people so that they can catch themselves before they
Mhm.
have a complete breakdown like I
Yes.
did.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
where you and I are in complete alignment, because that is my mission as well. The whole reason I started the ministry was that I was able to put the brakes on and save myself from developing a very serious drinking problem that would have landed me in rehab or a 12-step program or behind the wheel of hurting someone or myself. And you and I are on the exact same mission, that now is the time.
Yeah.
Now's the time to break out of the gray zone, interrupt the cycle, whatever you prefer to call it, but do not wait. And one of the other things that we can talk about too that might be helpful to your audience is around why the gray zone develops and persists beyond that you're getting an immediate benefit. We can talk a little bit about the reward circuit in the brain and how you can
Yeah.
get it to work for you instead of against you when you're trying to beat, an alcohol craving or a food craving, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I was hoping
Okay.
that conversation was going to go into the hormones and the chemicals of our biochemistry. Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I won't go into all the technical terms around the structures in the brain, but you've got a reward circuit in your brain, right? And I think probably your audience is probably quite savvy and sophisticated that they have a little bit of understanding about how the reward system works. For those who don't really know much about it, the primary chemical that comes out of that reward system is dopamine, but other things like oxytocin can show up, noradrenaline, all things that make you feel good, give you energy, reward you, so to speak. That's why it's called the reward circuit. So when you're engaging in, I'll just use myself again as an example. When I would come home and open that first bottle of wine, you start teaching your brain. I didn't even have to take a sip of the wine yet, right? The physical act of opening the bottle, my brain already knew what was coming. So I would start to relax and I hadn't even had a sip yet. And that's because I had trained my brain that when in these situations, in these stressful situations, when I wanted to turn my mind down or off, that I would have the glass of wine because it takes roughly about 10 minutes or so for the alcohol to start working its way into your bloodstream, depending on how much food is in your stomach, right? And so my brain learned over time because I was having something to drink. I never drank to excess, right? It was like usually 1 to 3 a night, depending on how busy, but every night for 5 years, right? 365 times 5. You guys do the math. So my brain had learned that, oh, this is the response needed in these situations. So as soon as I pour the glass, that everything was already taking effect. I had already primed my reward system in my brain to release the dopamine, right? The alcohol, even if I hadn't had the alcohol and I had had a glass of water, but it came from a wine bottle, my brain still would have said, "Oh, time to relax," and all that cascade would have happened because I had completely trained that reward system for what's coming. Does that make sense?
I love that analogy. I
Mm-hmm.
love that analogy because that is basically what conditioned responses and automatic programming is. But what you just gave was what I see as a secret to how you can program yourself, which is what I believe. I was a gray zone drinker, but I was also a smoker.
Okay.
And for me, the very act of the cigarette, hold it in, and then slowly release it.
Mm-hmm.
I, when I get stressed, I still do that movement, that deep breath. Now I know we've got breath work and all these other things that are associated with it. But in my head, I was doing it the way I would drag on a cigarette. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're talking about just the bottle of wine, like Pavlov's effect,
Yeah.
just sets that whole programming into
Yeah.
motion. Okay, here we are. This is what's happening. Boopity, boopity, boop. And we are out of control. We are on automatic pilot.
Yes.
How did you? I did not get myself out. I broke.
Okay.
I
Okay.
broke. I had a complete and total nervous breakdown. How did you
Mm-hmm.
stop it before that?
Before I get to that, I'd like to be like completely transparent with your audience. And it's, I think there's probably somebody who needs to hear it because you just talked about your own experience around I broke. So in my 40s, I did have, for all intents and purposes, a nervous breakdown, right? And it even got to the point where I had a plan to commit suicide. I was trying to figure out because all of this made complete and total sense to me, right? I was about 43 years old, that I just had to figure out a way to make sure the suicide looked like an accidental death so my husband would get the insurance money. Right? That's the only thing that was holding me up, was how can I make this look like an accident so my husband gets the insurance money and he's not destitute, because the primary breadwinner of the house just died, just killed herself, right? And so I got there as well. And to be honest with you, the thing that helped me get out of that particular thing, because I didn't have a gray zone drinking habit yet, right? The thing that undid me was what you were talking about. We are programmed at a certain point in our life with thought patterns that drive us relentlessly, right? And I was driven by relentless perfectionism, by a limiting belief of something's wrong with me. And if people get to know me, they will figure out that something's wrong with me. So I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect. Right? It drove me and drove me and drove me. It was exhausting. No wonder I ended up in that place. Right?
Yeah.
And the thing that got me out of that, because this is what I want your audience to know, is if anybody's in that place right now and they're like, oh my gosh, that lady's talking about me. By the grace of God, I had worked for a pharmaceutical company prior to the work I was doing as a psychiatric specialty manager. And so I knew all kinds of things about depression, medications. I even had a leftover chart that I used to give out to physicians to evaluate yourself. It's called the Hamilton D rating scale for depression. I happen to have those forms still in my house. And I had enough sense left in me to go, something's really wrong here. Because when your brain's not working, you don't know that your brain's not working, right?
Yeah.
But some piece of me was still there enough, telling me that, you know what, I don't think it makes sense that you have these suicide plans. I don't think that makes sense. And the other part of me was, it makes perfect sense, right? So as I filled out the form, I realized, because a score of 23, you need to go to the hospital now and be hospitalized, was the worst. I scored an 18, and I knew that was bad. So I got on the phone and I said, and I told them exactly what I just told you. They were stunned because nobody ever calls and said, I just scored myself on this rating scale of depression and I scored an 18. So yeah, that's the way the conversation went. So they whisked me in. I got to see my doctor right away. We walked through it. She knew my entire history of what I had done and and I walked her through it. I'm like, I want to start on this medication at this dose. I'll titrate after 3 weeks to this dose. Like, even in my depression mind, it was so drilled into me about how to get myself the help I needed. But the point I want your audience to take away from this is, when you ask for help, an amazing system is in place to support you and to get you the help you need as soon as possible. So that's what I did. And I got the right kind of counseling. I got the right kind of medication. I ended up losing my job, I'm sorry to say, around that, but it also turned out to be the best thing ever, because a year later, I came back to the same company in a different role that set me up for unbelievable success. So I wanted to share that story. Thanks everybody for staying with me, because I have been there. Now, to answer your question around how did I break myself out of the gray zone, I understood that I was at another critical point in my life. So going through that depression point helped me develop the base and the understanding for when I was at true pivot points in my life. And so I got to the point of, I had that worst day of my career that I mentioned at the beginning of this interview. And that was day one in my alcohol-free life that interrupted that 5 years, 365 day that I was telling you about. And I had the experience of, the next day, I didn't have anything to drink again because I was too tired, right? Like, this series of events unfolded over 3 days that I ended up on the third day sitting on my couch. I had nothing to drink in my house, which was unusual. And I was sitting on the couch, looking out the window, trying to decide if I was going to bring something in the house and start that cycle all over again. And as I was thinking hard about it. I was thinking so hard about it. I've never struggled like that before because I understood what was happening. I'm a woman of faith. The Holy Spirit spoke to me. I was not as devout in my faith then, but the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, now's the time. And then I got shown what my life would look like if I kept on the same path. I was in a new city, a new state. I didn't know anybody. I was 55 years old, and I knew if I didn't do something now, I would stroke out, I would have a heart attack. Something awful was going to happen if I didn't do something now. And so that point at that day 3, when I heard now's the time, I understood. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I understood it was the time to do it.
Wow. Hang on a second.
Mm-hmm.
I
know
just,
that was a lot of information.
No. That was amazing. I was just thinking of so many things of you sitting there. Yes, there is help.
Yes.
But we have to own our own health care. I circled down into depression, but it was because I had fibromyalgia. And they had turned me into a chemical experiment. Mm-hmm. And the amount of drugs that they were throwing at me trying to manage. At the time, nobody knew that stress was the root cause of fibromyalgia, which is how I became a stress expert in trying to heal all of this. So I was just medicated. And then my breaking point was in the hospital where the police broke down my door and dragged me out, and they formed me. And it was right after seeing a psychiatrist. And when I told the psychiatrist what had happened after the day I saw him, his response to me was, my role in your healthcare is to make sure you're adequately medicated, not healed.
Okay.
So I only say that for those people who, if they feel like there's some resistance in asking for help, yes, there is really good help out there, but there are also people who are locked into a system that we are just a formula and that pills and platitudes are how you resolve this. And there is good help. And
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kathy, because I was only going to completely back you up on what you had to say, because my experience was 15 years ago. And this is not like the way the medical system is designed today. I would agree with you that your depression likely doesn't need to be medicated. There are probably other root causes that you could get to first. And I 100% agree with you that be your own medical advocate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I love the fact that you had the self-awareness to understand that your brain, while it made sense to you, because our own thoughts do make sense to us, even when we are totally in our sympathetic and our frontal lobe is cut off, we have no logic, we have no ability to discern, our thoughts still make sense to us.
Yes.
And so we live in this world of normal where nothing is normal and we're not empowered. And so these conversations are so important for people to recognize through an external source, an external story, because that is how our gut and our body and our minds talk to us, by reacting to an outside stimulus. So sharing your story is so, so important. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to do it. The entire reason I'm doing what I am now is because I've been called to do it. I wanted to stay in medicine. And, that was a year-long wrestling process. And 2 years ago, I finally made the decision that I will stop wrestling and go into, this area of, because like I mentioned earlier, I was coaching all kinds of people for free, right? And I finally understood that there can be, I can help people, but I can still take care of myself and put a roof over my head. But I can also start a ministry around this as well. And it's, you and I do what we do because we're trying to do for others what we had to figure out for ourselves. We don't want you to go through what we had to go through. We want to give you this shortcut. And this is a mission project for Kathy, for me. This is not just, hey, this might be a cool way to, pay my bills kind of thing. I'm trying to build an empire of impact. And I know you are too, Kathy.
Ooh, I love those words. That just gave me chills because you're right. We're part of what we're going through is this shifting of our society and an empire of impact instead of an empire of profit or an empire of control. Coming back to our center of true alignment and purpose. It is a
Yes.
calling.
Mm-hmm.
It is a calling.
Well, I think, whether your language is life, universe, creator, intelligence, God, we have clearly been put on this planet to serve a purpose, right? And there's even imaging data from Dr. Andrew Newberg. Here I go. Watch out. Here I go with the brain science again.
Nerd away.
Dr. Newberg, this is probably about 2019 when he published these findings, had a group of monks, a group of Buddhist monks, a group of nuns, Catholic nuns, some Mormons, and I'm trying to remember, I can't remember off the top of my head. So what he wanted to determine was, if you're in any kind of faith practice, does it matter what kind of faith practice it is and what happens in the brain when you're in the middle of a faith practice, right? And Dr. Newberg would be the first to tell you that he is of no religious background. He was just curious about the power of that kind of very intense meditative practice, what it does in the brain. So it turns out that on brain imaging scans, the area, the reward circuit that you and I were talking about in the limbic system, about when you ingest alcohol or you smoke the cigarette, that system gets lit up. When we're scrolling on, TikTok videos, that system gets lit up. Your brain in that entire system lights up as well. So we have brain scan data to prove that when we are pursuing something higher than ourselves, when we are pursuing a life to be the person we were put on this planet to be, that is the exact part of the brain that lights up.
Well, if that does not prove that the crap we've been taught, that we are replaceable, that we are expendable, that our lives don't matter, that debunks everything because there is no accidents in this world. And when we are living on purpose, one of the guys that I love to study, he talks about flow and the neurons that get released when we go into that state and how we can feed our own dopamine by being in flow. And we're only in flow when we're on purpose, right? When we're living in who we are and we're lit up and we're excited, then all of that. I want to come back to the placebo effect because you were talking about, okay, so one day I love food. I'm a foodie. I love food. So I was in this Michelin 5-star restaurant and it was the most amazing food. I mean, every part of it lit up my mouth and my body, and the view was spectacular and the service was amazing. So every single one of my senses was lit up.
Yes.
I took from them a bottle that looks like a wine bottle, but that was where they put their water. And I said, what do you do with these bottles when you're done? And they said, well, we just put them in recycling, we get rid of them. And I'm like, that is how I want to serve myself my water.
Okay.
Can we do that? Can we take something that is our challenge, our gray zones, our stresses, and turn it around to become an empowerment by putting water in a wine bottle, for example?
I love that reverse, turning water into wine. I'm going to turn that wine into water. I
Well,
love
Jesus did it.
Jesus did it. That's right. You touched on a really good point that there's so many teachers over the span of human history talking about limiting beliefs, right? And limiting beliefs, for anybody in your audience who doesn't know, are things that you tell yourself that keep you stuck in your gray zone, right? Money's hard to make. There's no good men out there. There's not enough time, right? These are all examples of limiting
I'm
beliefs.
too old. I'm too fat.
Old. It's too late. It's right. I'm too far behind. I'm not worthy. I don't know how to do this. And we have the capacity. It's not necessarily related to placebo effect, but it does affect the brain and how you move back and forth in your nervous system. So if you tell yourself those things, like I did at age 55, I'm too old. Where am I going to find another job that gives me this sense of purpose? I don't know. I feel trapped in this job. I don't know what to do. I'm going to pour the glass of wine, right? So I thought the problem was the wine, but it was the limiting beliefs. And the point I'm trying to make here is we have the capacity as human beings to change, because beliefs are decisions, right? We can change our beliefs at any point in history of our personal history. And the key to the change is you can't just start writing things and believe it, right? Because your brain will be like, I don't think so. That is not true. What you can do is look into your evidence, and we can talk another part about the brain, about where this happens in the brain, if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go there in
Knowledge
just
is
a
power.
second. Knowledge is power. So when you make a new decision, let's say you're telling yourself, I'm too old, because that's what I did. And you tell yourself, I'm not too old. And then you start looking for evidence of why this is true. Then I started thinking about, how old was I when I learned to do things for the first time at certain points in my life, right? And so I started collecting the evidence of it, and I started writing it down. Okay, here's what my new belief is. What's the evidence of it? And this is where the part of the brain comes in. This is your reticular activating system, right? It serves as your brain's filter. So just like when you set filters, let's say you go to zappos.com to order some super cool new shoes, and you can set all the filters, right? So the filter is, I size 7.5, and I want black, and I want it this heel height and this. You can set all those filters, right? So in your RAS, your limiting belief is the filter. And because your brain is processing up to 60,000 pieces of information a day, it has to prioritize what it pays attention to, right? So when I told myself I was too old, my brain, because it's a goal achieving machine, started looking for all the reasons why I was too old. But when I did the reverse, when I actively said, now I'm changing the filter, let's find all the reasons why I can do this, I started finding all the examples. So my point to your audience is, everything you want is already available and it exists. You need to change the filter in your brain. Is it easy to do? No, you need to do it on a consistent basis. Will it take you as long to build that new pathway in your brain as it did the old one? Nope. That's the good news. That's the good news. It'll take you roughly, if you're doing it consistently on a daily basis. My favorite neuroscientist, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, has a paper out that talks about by day 63, you can already, on brain scans, you can already start to see the formation of the new neural pathway of that belief in your brain. So it won't be your default at day 63, but for sure by about the 9-month to the 12-month period, you will have a completely new life, because your filter has taken effect in your brain. That make sense?
Absolutely. And thank you for the
Okay.
science of that. I truly believe the power is in our decisions, and it is the quality of our decisions, and that our brains are designed to be the most efficient autopilot that ever existed. And if, as long as we're on autopilot,
Yes.
we can't change. And so it is that decision and creating new habits that make us do those new wiring of our thoughts and our beliefs. Yeah. But we have to be out of autopilot. We have to make a conscious decision. We have to create conscious habits, whether it is, the string around your wrist, or different habits or cues that take us out of autopilot and put us into our power.
One of the things I'd like to share with your audience, because it helps when they understand this, it helps to take away shame, blame, or judgment that they might feel around, I'm lazy, or I'm a bad character, or I'm this, or I'm that, right? And one of the things that happens, to your point about we do things on autopilot, there's a specific reason why your brain does that, right? So your brain uses about 20% of your daily energy. That, let's say you take in 2,000 calories a day, 20% is going just for your brain function, right? And your brain's number one job is to keep you safe. So it never forgets things, right? You do forget things, but there are certain things that you can do to trigger memories, et cetera, right? So neural pathways are never erased unless there's been some kind of physical damage to your brain. And it's designed to keep you safe and always be scanning for threats and danger, right? That's the number one job of your brain. So what I want people to understand is you can use your mind to calm your brain and train your brain that I know you're trying to protect me. Let's start looking for all the reasons why I can succeed and why things are true. And each time I bump up against this limiting belief, it's just one more opportunity to put another piece in that link of a new neural pathway in my brain. So I'm hoping that helps your audience.
Oh, that is beautiful. I love that whole explanation, because for me, the reason that I went about unlearning the crap and all of this came about was because I needed the science to make sense for me. Yeah. I needed to understand, this is happening because of this. Yes. And because I believe that as soon as we know it, we can't unknow it. So these conversations of helping people to make sense of the confusion, the crap that we haven't been taught. We haven't been taught how our body works. We haven't been taught how our brain works. We haven't been taught how we can wire our own selves, and we've been taught so many other things, but it's for somebody else's benefit.
Right.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that is I think we live in a unique time now where we have access to more information than we've ever had before. And the responsibility on us is to find people we trust, and then to dive wholeheartedly into, what do I want my health to look like? What do I want my mental health to look like? What do I want my relationships? I mean, we have the power now to completely advocate for ourselves. And I know that can be scary sometimes, right? But it's also incredibly empowering because we get to decide now.
Yeah. Okay, so you just segued beautifully into the next thing that I was going to talk about, which is we were designed in community, in collaboration. We were not designed to do this alone. And so part of the crap we were taught is there's something wrong with us if we ask for help, if we don't know it all and do it all by ourselves. And so I really want us to debunk that and explain that people like you and me, we're here to help through the process, to speed it up. So we're not wasting any more precious time and precious life.
I love that so much. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I've seen too many people end their lives early with so many regrets. because they didn't ask for the help?
It's so fascinating. I often ask myself that question, where does it come from, right? Because I have to do it myself is a limiting belief. And when I started asking for help, the most miraculous thing, I had to change a belief. It's okay. It's actually a good thing to ask for help was, the belief that I came up with, and I started looking for evidence for it. And the more I ask for help, the more success I have. And the more I discover that people really respect you when you say, this is an area that I could use your help in. And it's also provides them the opportunity to be a blessing in return, to share what they know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the integrated, interrelated systems that our society, our human beings were designed for in the world we live in. So, Kathryn, those people who have heard you, who identify with you and what you do and how you do it with your mission, how do they reach you? How do they find you?
You can find me. I'm most everywhere. You can find me at my website, which is Revive, REVIVE, soberspirit.com. And you can find me on the socials under Kathryn Traff Coaching. So it's just like my name that you see on the screen, spelled that way. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Where else am I? I'm on LinkedIn. So, or you can just reach me at KathrynTraffCoaching@gmail. So hopefully that's plenty of ways and simple enough to find me.
Well, I don't think you missed anything. So
Okay, good. Oh, I forgot one.
Yeah,
because
go.
I have the most amazing Jen. I think she's like an older Gen Z or young millennial, but she's helping with me with all the social media to be available to all of you. And she has created a TikTok account for me as well at Kathryn Traff Coaching. So I had one I forgot to mention to you.
Beautiful. I'm a huge TikTok fan. I believe that is one of the best ways for people like you and me to share information with others and have it be freely available, because you're right. The information is out there and we don't need to go it alone. I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you. It's a joy to be here.
I love geeking out. I love going down the science and the experiments rabbit hole and finding proof that makes things make sense. And I know we're always learning and expanding our ability to understand this complicated world we live in. And I encourage everyone who identifies with you and feels compelled to seize their own empowerment wherever they are dealing with whatever crap's in their way. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a treat this has been.
This has been Unlearn the Crap TV with your host, Kathy Baldwin. Tune in each week as Kathy challenges you to rethink everything you know about personal empowerment and societal structures. Thursdays, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.